Good evening, Alex. Sean Penn is going to be joining us later in the hour tonight. He has now produced, directed a documentary about his experience in Ukraine, which brings you inside the kind of news we heard today, which was this horrible Vladimir Putin setting another record for killing civilians in Ukraine today. Sean Penn's been there after those kinds of strikes and is going to show us and tell us what that's like.
That's really I'm eager to see that, Lawrence. That's really important stuff to cover. Thank you for doing that.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you.
Have a good show.
Thank you. Well, the breaking, incriminating news of the night about defendant Donald J. Trump is that he revealed nuclear secrets to an Australian billionaire who purchased his access to Donald Trump while Donald Trump was president. Donald Trump is the only president in history who publicly put a price tag on physical access to him, with the price paid for that access going straight into his own personal pocket, not his campaign. Australian billionaire Anthony Pratt decided to pay that price for access to the President of the United States by buying a membership at the Mar-a-Lago club that Donald Trump runs at his Florida residence because he could not afford the home without the income from the club. The Australian billionaire bought that access only after Donald Trump became president, and he got exactly what he wanted at the club, which was frequent contact with Donald Trump, including having dinner with the then President of the United States. The New York Times is reporting tonight, shortly after he left office, former President Donald J. Trump shared apparently classified information about American nuclear submarines with an Australian businessman during an evening of conversation at Mar-a-Lago, his private club and residence in Florida, according to two people familiar with the matter. According to another person familiar with the matter, Mr. Pratt is now among more than 80 people whom prosecutors have identified as possible witnesses who could testify against Mr. Trump at the classified documents trial, which is scheduled to start in May in federal district court in Florida. The account that Mr. Trump discussed some of the country's most sensitive nuclear secrets with him in a cavalier fashion could help prosecutors establish that the former president had a long habit of recklessly handling classified information. And the existence of the testimony about the conversation underscores how much additional information the Special Prosecutor's Office may have amassed out of the public's view. The secrets that Donald Trump revealed to the Australian billionaire about the United States Navy submarines included, quote, how many nuclear warheads the vessels carried and how close they could get to their Russian counterparts without being detected. Donald Trump has had no access to additional classified information since leaving the presidency because of this.
I just think that there's no need for him to have that intelligence briefing. What value is giving him an intelligence briefing? What impact does he have at all, other than the fact he might slip and say something?
We have entered the dismissal and delay stage of the Trump prosecutions, with criminal defense lawyers doing what criminal defense lawyers almost always do: ask for dismissals and ask for delays. Motions to dismiss in criminal cases are standard defense procedure that rarely work. Motions to delay the cases are also standard procedure and do work more frequently. Today, at 8:30 a.m., Trump criminal defense lawyers asked their favorite judge, Aileen Mercedes Cannon, who was appointed by Donald Trump, to delay the trial in the classified documents case 6 months so that it wouldn't begin before November of next year. That would get the trial to start after the presidential election. At 10:45 a.m., Donald Trump's Georgia co-defendant, David Schaefer, adopted co-defendant Kenneth Chesebro's motion to dismiss. At 11:29 a.m., Georgia co-defendant Sidney Powell filed a reply to the prosecution's response to a motion to dismiss. At 2 p.m., Donald Trump moved to dismiss Jack Smith's Washington, D.C. prosecution for crimes leading up to and on January 6th. At 2:13 p.m., Georgia co-defendant Robert Cheeley filed a motion to dismiss the charges against him. At 4 p.m., Donald Trump filed a motion to dismiss the criminal charges against him in Manhattan for business fraud in payoffs to porn star Stormy Daniels. And at 5:15 p.m., Georgia Judge Scott McAfee held a hearing on motions to dismiss by co-defendant Sidney Powell and indicated that a dismissal would be unlikely. Leading off our discussion tonight is Barbara McQuade, former U.S. attorney and law professor at the University of Michigan Law School, Glenn Kirshner, a former federal prosecutor and host of the Justice Matters podcast. Both are MSNBC legal analysts. And Bradley Moss is with us, a national security attorney who represents people who work in the intelligence community. And Bradley Moss, let me begin with you on this breaking news of this hour about Donald Trump verbally, apparently, sharing nuclear submarine secrets with an Australian who then told approximately 80 people, according to the follow-up reporting on how many people this person told. It's an endless stream of people kept hearing about it just from that one source. What does this do to the prosecution of Donald Trump in Florida, if anything?
Well, I certainly expect to see stories like this played out as fact witnesses to establish a pattern of conduct by Donald Trump, how loose his, bronzed lips were with respect to classified information, particularly after he left the presidency, the extent to which he had no respect for the safeguarding of the classified information to which he had been privy while president. But in terms of a larger idea, this is why we were always so terrified about Mar-a-Lago and Bedminster existing the way they were throughout the Trump presidency. They were counterintelligence nightmares. They were the things that keep security officials up at night. The idea that these various individuals from foreign countries with whatever ulterior motives they might have could just buy access to Donald Trump for whatever, $200,000 a year. And Donald Trump loves to talk and he loves to brag. And this is what they were worried about all that time.
And Barbara McQuade, there's an additional witness to this who worked at Mar-a-Lago, who heard this kind of talk from Donald Trump, was very troubled by it. And the idea that Russians could find out this way how close U.S. submarines can get to them undetected, it's a pretty simple route from Mar-a-Lago to Russian intelligence.
Absolutely, Lawrence. And in fact, if these allegations are true, it is itself a separate crime. I don't know that we'll see a separate crime charge just because it can be difficult to prove crimes that are based solely on oral communications, just because human memories are fallible and sometimes people misstate or misunderstand things. But the fact that this Australian businessman says how troubled he was, there's another witness who says they heard it, it does demonstrate that this is an accurate statement and also the danger that it poses. So it's not just a technical violation of the law, it is one that undermines the national security of our country. Frankly, as someone once said, Donald Trump is a walking national security risk because he, as former president, has a lot of really valuable information in his head. Most presidents are loyal enough to the country not to disclose them to people unauthorized to receive that information. But with Donald Trump, we've seen it with the documents, and now it seems that we're hearing it with oral communications as well.
And Glenn Kirshner, this takes us back to the presidential transition from the Obama presidency to the Trump presidency, where there was a lot of discussion about how can a president run a business, several different kinds of business, and how can a president run a business like Mar-a-Lago, where people can simply buy a membership to get access to that place, to that president. That's exactly what we have here. This guy had no interest in Mar-a-Lago until Donald Trump was president. Then he decided to buy that membership so he could get that access, and it turns out, obtain nuclear secrets.
Lawrence, Donald Trump has never been in the presidency for the good of the people, for the security of the nation, for the health and well-being of our military members. He has always been in it for himself. What he can get out of it. And I don't know how many times and in how many ways we're going to have that thrown in our face before we start to see some real accountability. Don't get me wrong, 4 criminal indictments, 2 state and 2 federal, are a good start, but they're only a start. We have continued to let him, when I say we, I mean the institutions of government, have continued to let him endanger witnesses, judges, jurors, their family members, and it finally took a state court judge, Judge Arthur Engoron, to step up and say enough is enough. And whereas I was thrilled to see Judge Engoron issue a partial gag order to help protect his court staff, you know, shouldn't we be in the business of protecting everybody, witnesses, jurors, judges, prosecutors, and others against Donald Trump's dangerous rhetoric, not when it just happens to be somebody very close to us like our court staff? So, I mean, the danger that Donald Trump continues to pose to this country, to our military members, to foreign countries, as I think exemplified by this new, just unfathomable reporting about him sharing nuclear secrets, is it just can't be overstated.
And Bradley Moss, Donald Trump is now seeking a delay just past the election on the case involving these classified documents and classified information, the violation of the Espionage Act and obstruction of justice case in Florida. What do you make of that request for that delay, which of course Jack Smith is opposing?
Yeah, it's a nice little attempt on his part. I don't think he expects to actually get it pushed off the full 6 months. His goal here is, can I get a little bit? Can I get something just to delay it enough that it continues to push it closer and closer, so that depending on what appeals I have of any immediate pretrial motions, it makes it more and more unlikely that this makes it to trial, or at least completes trial before the election. Because once it gets closer to the election, there's going to be a lot of pressure to shut down the criminal proceeding, lest it literally be him sitting in a courtroom in October of 2024 instead of sitting on the campaign trail. So that's his goal here. And I don't expect Judge Cannon, you know, for all the concerns we've had about her, I don't expect her to really grant some extensive extension here. But I do see her taking her sweet time, possibly, to get around deciding what she wants to do, and maybe giving him a little bit more slack than he should be given at this point.
Burt McQuaid, this is a standard stage of criminal procedure: defense motions to dismiss, defense motions to delay. In this case, the Trump lawyer is saying, we haven't had enough time with the classified documents, and there's no facility in Florida where we can adequately examine the classified documents yet, therefore we must have a delay. What are you seeing in the dismissal motions that might have merit, if anything?
Yeah, nothing really, Lawrence, concerns me right now. We've got a couple of dismissal motions filed by Donald Trump. One based on this sort of double jeopardy idea that the fact that he was not convicted at his impeachment hearing by the Senate, that somehow precludes criminal prosecution. I don't see that one going anywhere. Those are different entities, different branches of government with very different functions and purposes. He's got another one that says that because he was president of the United States, he's immune from criminal prosecution. Again, I don't see this one surviving, and that's because although the president does have broad powers to take care that the laws be faithfully executed under the Constitution, and even though the president does enjoy immunity for actions that he takes within the official scope of his office, the allegations about what he did in this election is outside of that scope. Interfering with the state elections is not part of his federal duties. The president has no role to play in the administration of elections. That belongs to the states. In fact, I think it's more accurate to characterize what he was doing in the alleged conduct in the indictments was campaigning and not governing. So I don't think that motion's going anywhere either.
Glenn Kirshner, President Ford and President Nixon, if they were alive, would be fascinated by the idea of presidential immunity. Jerry Ford would want to know, well, why did I have to issue a pardon to Richard Nixon after he was president, a pardon that may have cost Gerald Ford the next presidential election?
Yeah, Lawrence, absolutely. This is, in essence, the defense filing a motion that says if the president does it, it's not illegal. And my friend Barb is so much more tactful than I am. I agree with everything she said about this frivolous defense motion to dismiss. When I was reading it earlier today, Lawrence, I tell you, if there were people sitting around me and they listened closely, they could probably hear some of my brain cells dying and hitting the floor. I mean, the arguments were just that bad, particularly the contorted interpretation of the impeachment clause. I can't wait to read the reply from Jack Smith's prosecutors, because if their earlier responses to similarly frivolous motions are any indication, it's going to be some really good reading.
Barbara McQuaid, Glenn Kirshner, Bradley Moss, thank you all for starting off our discussion tonight.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you. And coming up, just over an hour ago, Donald Trump dropped a lawsuit that he filed in April because he was afraid of being forced to testify under oath in that lawsuit, in a deposition next week. And the fourth day of the civil fraud case against Donald Trump in a New York City courtroom went much smoother today without Donald Trump in the room. That's next.